So, hello and welcome everyone. We'll be starting this new series today looking at, firstly, from the Buddhist master, the Buddhist teacher, Ajahn Buddhadasa. It's going to be a really lovely, poignant kind of reading and event, I think. If you're watching this later on, we can move ahead to the 10-minute mark, which is when we'll formally get started. So for these next 10 minutes, we will have the space open for us who are already here to settle in, and also for people to come in and join us for the next 10 minutes. I'm going to pay my respects to the Buddha, my teacher, and also light some incense, offer some incense to the Buddha, and then we'll kind of get started after that. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, now I can see everyone who's so kindly saying hello. AZP, Cricket, Catherine, maybe you can watch later. Hi there, Merlin. Welcome in. And Jacob. Hey, Luke. Glad that you're here. Keem. Yuvraj. Kuv. Hey, Kuv. Hello, Anna. Paul. Thomas is here, and Chad is here as well. Everything is okay in Italy. We will be getting settled in and hanging out for about another 5 minutes before we officially get started. So, coming into the space, sharing anything that we need to share. Beginning to kind of bring our whole life to the now. Maybe we had all kinds of things going on today, difficulties, confusions, things we liked, things we didn't like. But now, coming into this space of wisdom, mindfulness, a contemplative space for us to cultivate our own wisdom, our own inner reflection together. Hey there, Maylee. Glad that you're here. Yeah, so the meaning of the ritual is humbleness, respect, appreciation, wisdom teachings, for the teachings of the Buddha. The bit of chanting that I did is paying homage to the Buddha, paying respect to our inner Buddha, our inner ability to wake up enlightened, or even more relevant, to become deeply, deeply skillful. Deeply, deeply ethical, moral, compassionate. And so we have this inner capacity, and in Buddhism, in kind of the Buddhism, we really venerate that. We really pay respect to that. And so especially as a monk, I'm quite involved in that practice. And so that is paying respect to the Buddha. People often imagine that the Buddha, even here in this local area in Italy, we're kind of in the city center, and there's glass kind of walls in the temple room. So people look over here and they think that this Buddha is some kind of god that we're worshiping. But that ritual that I just did has nothing to do with worshiping the Buddha as a god. The Buddha is my founding teacher, an inspiration, and kind of someone who has taken on a romantic and a poetic quality from their deep wisdom and compassion. So that's what the Buddha represents for me, and naturally I pay respect to that, and I'm humbled by that. So that's a process, a ritual to tune into that humbleness, that gratefulness. And it's also a part of Asian culture in general, in some respects, this level of respect or reverence for elders or for monks or for certain people that we don't really have so much in Western society. All right, so it's just about 10 minutes after the hour, or 10 minutes after we went live, which is kind of our formal start time. So, welcome everyone. I am Bhante Warapano. I am the facilitator for our exploration of wisdom today, looking at the teacher Ajahn Buddhadasa, this quite famous and wise Buddhist monk that passed away not too long ago, so a modern Buddhist monk and teacher. And we're going to be looking at this teaching of utilizing the mind's natural state of concentration. So we oftentimes in meditation get very focused in on having these intense experiences or this intense concentration. But here we'll approach about gaining insight into the nature of our mind through this subtle, open, natural concentration that we all kind of have access to, and we don't have to struggle so much to achieve. So before we get started with this reading, this guided reading, we're going to do a brief kind of centering, grounding meditation before we open up to these teachings. So taking a moment to find a comfortable position. Maybe you're sitting in a computer chair, maybe you're sitting on the floor or laying down. But just taking a moment to find a comfortable position for your body. It doesn't need to be perfect, but finding that position for the body. That position that is somewhat stable, somewhat comfortable, so you're not working to hold yourself up, but you're just kind of sitting. And once we find that for the body, we can begin to bring our attention onto the breath, the feeling of the breath coming in through the nose and going out. The breath coming in through our nose and going out. And as we put our attention onto the breath, bringing the mind to the presence of the body, settling into this embodiment, this physical presence that we currently have. Breathing and noticing what it's like to have a body, what it's like to be here now. Breathing and settling our mind, settling our life to this moment, to this present. Noticing if there's any pain or if the mind is a bit uncomfortable or confused, noticing that. And return, noticing and breathing. Bringing up our intention, our sincerity to really practice. To really consider that there is wisdom in the world, that we can transform our suffering, we can develop, we can take care of ourselves, bringing up this sincerity and this consideration. And as we breathe, setting the intention to do exactly that. To listen from the heart. To really show up to our lives right now. to treat this opportunity to look at the Dharma, to look at these wisdom teachings, to treat it as a treasure, and to take advantage of it, to really dive in and to open up. To really be with the breath. Okay, so let's begin now with our reading. Now that we've come in a bit, maybe settled down for just a moment. And we're going to be looking at the teachings from this living master, or this modern master, this modern teacher, who is this monk in Thailand, Ajahn Buddhadasa. And we'll start with a little bit of an introduction, a very short biography about who is this Ajahn Buddhadasa, what's this about. So it's a short introduction to Ajahn Buddhadasa, which means teacher monk. And then we'll get into this reading about the part one of it, about insight by the nature method. So gaining insight into how mind works, into how reality functions. Gaining insight through a natural method of meditation. So, Ajahn Buddhadasa. Ajahn Buddhadasa is perhaps the best known master in Thailand at this time. I suppose he was alive when this book was written. In addition to being a great scholar of Buddhist tradition and scriptures, he is learned in many other fields. He has written numerous books in Thai and English on meditation, comparative religion, and the application of Dharma to daily life. So we're not reading teachings from some random person, some internet website. This is the stuff. This is it. In one extensive work, Anapanasati, Buddhadasa details the practice of formal mindfulness of breathing from the preliminary stages to final enlightenment. Although this was central to his own practice, and Anapanasati is a mindfulness breathing, that's the method of mindfulness of breathing. Although this was central to his own practice, he is more inclined these days to teach in a very open style, using meditation to approach each activity of the day. He is a very ecumenical teacher who stresses that the heart or truth of all religions is the same, freely borrowing images and ways of teaching from all traditions. Through his numerous Dharma tracts and elegantly simple talks, Buddhadasa has become a leading voice in raising Thai Dharma from simply ritual to an understanding of how peace arises from non-attachment. So a lot of Buddhism, especially monastic Buddhism, can become very cultural, very ritualistic, and it can sometimes be hard to find the wisdom teachings in that. So Buddhadasa was a leading voice in raising the Thai Dharma from simply ritual to an understanding of how peace arises from non-attachment. On entering Wat Suan Mok, which is his temple, and it still exists, but he's passed away, one encounters a Zen-like feeling of peace and harmony with nature. Suan Mok is both a meditation temple for the few nuns and 30 to 50 resident monks, and a center for lay visitors. It is surrounded by the beauty of a large still pond and acres of southern Thai forest, rolling up the hills with cottages scattered throughout. In going to live with Buddhadasa, one is free to practice various methods. One may sit alone and pursue strict mindfulness of breathing as an intensive formal practice, or study the scriptures under Buddhadasa's guidance. Most often, however, the monks and nuns who live at Suwanmok practice a kind of meditation in action, while working at various projects around the monastery. This is the chief focus of Buddhadasa's teaching. Natural meditation done throughout one's daily activities. Although he does not deny that the strict, intensive methods advocated by their teachers may lead to insight and liberation, he warns us about the dangers of attachment to any formal practice, to concentration, or to any special state of mind. In advocating the natural development of insight, Buddhadasa does not see himself as a meditation master who directs one's practice, but rather as a good friend who provides a suitable place to live, good advice on how to allow the natural development of wisdom to take place. A big part of his natural approach is to encourage people to see clearly how any desire at all leads them to suffering. Meditation brings the elimination of wrong views, unskillful views, views that lead to suffering. More and more we see the uselessness of striving for personal gain or happiness in the constantly changing world outside ourselves, and realize the peace of mind that comes from non-striving, non-chasing, non-desire. This natural unfolding of the path of morality, clear view, and unselfishness is Buddhadasa's way of approaching Dharma. So what are we doing here? What's going on here? Well, we are looking at the path of morality, of having a clear view, and unselfishness. And this is Buddhadasa's way of approaching the Dharma. It's also certainly what I'm considering to do here. It is clear, simple, and unmystical, leading to the joy of wisdom and the end of suffering. Now we'll get into the formal reading here about this method, insight by the natural method or the nature method by Ajahn. In this talk, we shall see how concentration may come about naturally on the one hand, and as a result of organized practice on the other. The end result is identical in the two cases. The mind is concentrated and fit to be used for carrying out close introspection. One thing must be noticed, however. The intensity of concentration that comes about naturally is usually sufficient and appropriate for introspection and insight, whereas the concentration resulting from intensive organized training is usually excessive, more than can be made use of. Furthermore, misguided satisfaction with that high concentration may result. While the mind is fully concentrated, it is likely to be experiencing such a satisfying kind of bliss and well-being that the meditator may become attached to it, or it to be the fruit of the path resulting from the attainment of nirvana. So saying here that if we're deeply focused on this, I want to be more concentrated, I want to have these special states of experience, well, we very well may become very concentrated. We very well may have these special experiences, but they're not permanent. And we may find that we cultivate and we develop a sense of attachment to this certain kind of experience. And because it's not permanent, we're going to suffer. We're going to be perpetuating our own suffering. And we may also get this false idea of enlightenment, this false idea of peace as some kind of blissful, pleasurable experience. And that's not what we're working with here. We're not trying to have plugging in the phone here. We're not trying to have a special intensive. We're not showing up to meditation, drooling, waiting for this special intense experience to happen. We're showing up here to practice introspection and exploration of our own state, our own mind. While the mind is fully concentrated, it is likely to be experiencing such a satisfying kind of bliss and well-being that the meditator may become attached to it. We're trying to be fluid, to grow, to explore, to understand, not to have this special experience. So while the mind is fully concentrated, it is likely to be experiencing such a satisfying kind of bliss and well-being that the meditator may become attached to it. Or imagine it to be the fruit of the path resulting from the attainment of nirvana. So people who have these interesting experiences in meditation may delude themselves and consider themselves to be this kind of enlightened sage, just because they had this blissful experience. Naturally occurring concentration, which is sufficient and suitable for use in introspection, is harmless, having none of the disadvantages inherent in concentration developed by means of intensive training. So this kind of naturally arising concentration. In the scriptures, in the traditional Buddhist texts, there are numerous references to people attaining naturally all stages of enlightenment. This generally came about in the presence of the Buddha himself, but also happened later with other teachers. These people did not go into the forest and sit, assiduously practicing concentration on certain topics in the way described in later manuals. Clearly, no organized effort was involved when full enlightenment was attained by the first 5 disciples of the Buddha upon hearing the discourse on non-selfhood, or by the 1,000 hermits upon hearing the fire sermon. So in these traditional Buddhist texts, after the Buddha became enlightened, he kind of wandered around. He went around and he would talk to people about his experience. He would talk to people about wisdom teachings. And many of those people, at that moment of hearing that wisdom, they became enlightened. So they didn't spend years and years of intensive practice living in graveyards or in the forest. They became enlightened from this natural concentration, from this natural insight into the nature of things. In these cases, keen, penetrating insight came about quite naturally. These examples clearly show that natural concentration is liable to develop of its own accord while one is attempting to understand clearly some question. What is suffering? How do I deal with suffering? What is the nature of myself? So these examples clearly show that natural concentration is liable to develop of its own accord, while one is attempting to understand clearly some question. And that resulting insight, as long as it is established, can be quite intense and stable. It happens naturally, automatically, and in just the same way as when the mind becomes concentrated the moment we set about doing arithmetic. So if we want to do a math problem, if we want to bring about some particular focus, something we want to do, we immediately tune in. We immediately have this sense of concentration. Maybe we're driving a car, or maybe we trip and fall. There's this natural concentration that arises. Likewise, in firing a gun, When we aim, the mind automatically becomes concentrated and steady. Or when we're shooting an arrow. Maybe some other things as well. Like I said, when we trip and fall, we immediately become concentrated and steady. This is how naturally occurring concentration comes about. We normally overlook it completely because it does not appear the least bit magical, miraculous, or awe-inspiring. But through the power of just this naturally occurring concentration, most of us could actually attain liberation. We could attain the fruit of liberation, nirvana, full enlightenment, just by means of natural concentration. So don't overlook this naturally occurring concentration. It is something most of us either already have or can readily develop. We can use it, as did most of the people who in ancient times succeeded in becoming enlightened, while knowing nothing of modern concentration techniques. So we can utilize this naturally arising concentration, this arising refined awareness, directed awareness. To be here, to be attentive, to be with it. And we're not always in that state, but if we're not, we can readily develop it. We can readily bring it about. And when we make a habit of it, it tends to come up a little bit more easily or a little bit more often. And those states that are kind of foggy or depend on not being concentrated, not being with it, not being aware, those states tend to naturally lessen. And that in and of itself is a lesson. So we come back again and again to this naturally arising concentration. We often ignore it. It does not appear to be the least bit magical, miraculous, or awe-inspiring. And yet it is there, this natural concentration. So don't overlook this naturally occurring concentration. It is something most of us either already have or can readily. We can use it, as did most of the people who in ancient times succeeded in becoming enlightened, while knowing nothing of complicated modern techniques of meditation. Now, let us have a look at the nature of the stages of inner awareness leading up to full insight into the world. That is, into the 5 aggregates. What are the 5 aggregates? Feelings, sensations, form, mental activity, perceptions, consciousness. So now let us take a look at the nature of the stages of inner awareness leading up to the full insight, the full seeing into, the full understanding about our perceptions, our form, our feelings, our discernment. The first stage is joy, mental happiness, spiritual well-being. So the first stage of developing our inner awareness, leading into this full insight, is joy, mental happiness, spiritual well-being. Doing good in some way, even giving alms or just giving donations. Considered the most basic form of merit-making, can be a source of joy. Higher up, morality or completely blameless conduct of word and action brings an even greater joy. Beyond this comes the joy of concentration. We discover there is great associated with even the lowest stages of concentration. So as we gain insight, these stages of gaining insight, getting with it, the first stage is joy, mental happiness, well-being or peace. And the first stage, what can bring about the first stage, is simply ethical activity. And that in and of itself is joyful and can be a source of joy. And then we move even higher up into blamelessly living in the world. So not practicing generosity or doing this one particular thing that is good or skillful, but beginning to totally and completely live blamelessly in the world, so that we are no longer getting involved in activities that are unkind, angry, nasty. And beyond even this comes the joy of concentration, the joy of really being with it. We discover that there is great delight associated with even the lowest stages of concentration. Rapture is developed. It has the power to induce tranquility. Normally the mind is quite unrestrained, continually falling slave to all sorts of thoughts and feelings associated with enticing things outside. So the first step on the path is ethical living, is morality. So we begin to work with living ethically, with living morally. And we find that living ethically, doing good, being generous, being patient, is joyful. It is a source of joy. Many times people who don't value ethics or don't value morality, they're just their joy or their replacement for joy is stimulation and pleasure. But this is a very base kind of experience. And we all enjoy pleasure. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's animalistic. Joy is something that we find from doing things that we can appreciate, that we can feel good about. We can look back on them and we can feel good about it. We can look towards them and we can feel good about it. We can be in the process of doing them and we can feel good about it. It's wholesome, it's pleasant, and it has a quality of peace and well-being to it. Whereas pleasure is just kind of this gross versus subtle, this gross stimulation. And it can be very gross as well. We all know pleasure is not inherently good or skillful. But a lot of people run around chasing pleasure and causing all kinds of suffering to all kinds of people, especially to themselves. So this first stage of inner awareness, developing insight into the nature of things, is joy, is sila, is morality, act ethically. And then we move into finding that developing our concentration, there's even a greater joy, a sense of rapture, a sense of liberation, a sense of peaceful relief. Whereas normally the mind is quite unrestrained, falling slave, literally, to all sorts of thoughts and feelings associated with enticing things outside, fears, inside or outside. It is normally restless, not calm. But as spiritual joy becomes established, calm and steadiness are bound to increase in proportion. So as spiritual joy, as ethical living, as a sense of coming back regularly to our naturally arising awareness or our natural state of concentration becomes a habit, becomes established, calm and steadiness are bound to increase in proportion. So it's quite a simple thing. We want to live happier lives, we want to become enlightened, we want to be super everything. Start to live ethically, intentionally, and start to lean into this naturally arising concentration, this development, this cultivation of a aware introspection. When steadiness has been perfected, the result is full concentration. The mind becomes tranquil, steady, flexible, manageable, light, and at ease. It is now ready to be used for any desired purpose, especially for the elimination of defilements or the elimination of those unskillful behaviors, those unskillful attachments, those subtle aspects of your mind that go towards a specific activity again and again and again, even though that it doesn't bring peace or wellness to your life. And it becomes very, very subtle. The more steady, the more calm, the more grounded we can become in ethical living and in this working on our concentration, working on our reliance on being aware instead of thinking and chasing, the more and more subtle our behaviors and our understanding of ourselves become. So we're more and more able to live in a way that goes in accordance with this calm, this peace, this wellness that we're establishing. The arising of this rapture and tranquility does not result in the mind's being rendered silent, hard, and rock-like. Nothing like that happens at all. The body feels normal, but the mind is especially calm and suitable for use in thinking and introspection. It is perfectly clear, perfectly cool, perfectly still and restrained. In other words, it is fit for work, ready to know. It is ready to be skillful. It is ready to be put to work for cultivating peace and reducing suffering. When we're established in ethics and we begin to stabilize ourselves in this naturally arising concentration, we can say in this natural state of being aware rather than getting involved in things. And when we establish ourselves in that, rather than becoming silent, hard, and rock-like, the body feels normal, but the mind is especially calm and suitable for use in introspection. It is clear, cool, still, and restrained. In other words, it is fit for work, ready to know. This is the degree of concentration to be aimed for, not the very deep concentration where one sits rigidly like a stone image, quite devoid of awareness. Sitting in deep concentration like that, one is in no position to investigate. A deeply concentrated mind cannot practice introspection at all. It is in a state of unawareness and is of no use for insight. Deep concentration is a major obstacle to insight practice. Insight practice being this way of introspection, looking into and gaining insight into the nature of the mind. And who better to find out about the nature of the mind than you? No one else is going to know better. There's no other better way to gain insight into how our mind works and functions. And the very nature of our mind is, by extension, the nature of reality. To practice introspection, one must first return to the shallow levels of concentration. Then one can make use of the power the mind has acquired. Highly developed concentration is just a tool. Rather than deep concentration, we aim a calm, steady mind. One so fit for work that when it is applied to insight practice, it gains right understanding with regard to the entire world. Insight so developed is natural insight, the same sort as was gained by some individuals while listening to the Buddha. It is conducive to thought and introspection of the right kind, the kind that brings understanding, and it involves neither ceremonial procedures nor miracles. This doesn't mean, however, that insight will arise instantaneously. One can't be enlightened straight off. The first step in knowledge may come about at any time, but depends on both the intensity of the concentration and how it is applied. Through concentrated, clear seeing, what insight does arise is experienced as quite special, extraordinarily clear and profound. If the knowledge gained is right knowledge, it will correspond with the direct experience of reality, and as practice deepens, it will progress, developing ultimately into right and true understanding of all phenomena. And sure, we can say, well, right and true understanding of all phenomena, how is that possible? It's right and true understanding of all phenomena according to this body, this mind, this experience. You can't go outside of it. Any tools looking into the nature of things, scientific tools or ways of philosophy, all these different kinds of things, are extensions of, expressions of this mind, this body. So here we're developing to the nature of our perceiving, the nature of our being, through introspection, through looking, through refinement. If insight develops in small measure, it may convert a person into a saint of sorts at the lowest stage. Or, if it is not sufficient to do that, it will just make them a high-minded individual, an ordinary person of good qualities. So just a little bit of insight, just a little bit of getting involved, taking a look, beginning to get introspective. Ajahn Buddhadasa says here, if insight develops even in a small measure, an insight into the way things are, it may convert a person into a saint of sorts at the lowest stage. Or, if it is not sufficient to do that, it will just make them a high-minded individual, an ordinary person of good qualities. If the environment is suitable and the proper qualities of mind have been adequately established, it is possible even today to become fully liberated. And even more to the point, it is possible to work on ourselves. It is impossible to heal our minds. It is impossible to develop our psychology, our emotional health, our psychological health. This is a workable situation that we find ourselves in. So we have to recognize that. We can work with this. We can take care of ourselves at very deep levels. And here, it is possible even today to become fully liberated, fully at peace. It all depends on the circumstances. But however far things go, as long as the mind has natural concentration, this factor called insight is bound to arise and to correspond more or less closely with reality. If we as meditators hear about, think about, and study the world, the mind and body, or five aggregates, form, feelings, perceptions, inclinations, discernment. If we as meditators hear about, think about, and study the world, the mind, the body, if we practice introspection, if we practice looking inward, honestly, in the hope of coming to understand our true nature, it follows that the knowledge we acquire while in a calm and concentrated state will not be misleading. So we're keeping it on the level. We're getting grounded. We're getting simple. And if we approach it in that way, if we approach our introspection honestly as meditators, in the hope of understanding our nature, not getting something, not avoiding something, not getting rid of something, but if we approach it wholeheartedly, sincerely, as meditators, with this natural concentration, it follows that the knowledge we acquire, the wisdom we acquire, while in a calm and concentrated state, will not be misleading, and in fact will be beneficial and insightful. It is bound to be always beneficial. The expression insight into the true nature of things refers to seeing transience. Everything is impermanent. Every thought, this body, all phenomena, all perceptions, all sensations, all pain, all fear, all happiness, everything is impermanent. And it's not a, well, so what? It's impermanent, so what? That doesn't mean anything. Look into this. Everything is impermanent. And our practice here is to be introspective about this aspect of, this fundamental aspect of reality, that every aspect of our experience, every phenomena, our entire body, everything we think, we like, we dislike, everything is impermanent. And it's not impermanent on a superficial level, it's literally impermanent. It is constantly impermanent, again and again and again and again. Our thoughts, our self-identity, the situation that we find ourselves in the world, our relationships with others, everything is impermanent, totally. So the expression, insight into the true nature of things, refers to seeing transience, seeing impermanence, experiencing more and more directly, seeing and experiencing directly unsatisfactoriness, seeing and experiencing directly non-selfhood. So all aspects of our experience are interconnected. A tree does not exist separate from anything else. A single thought or a single story or a single idea that you have about yourself or about the world does not exist separately from the entirety of the world and the entirety of the universe. In the same way that a tree does not exist separate from the sun, the earth, the soil, literally. And so we can understand it in this example, but it is a very, 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 very subtle aspect of the nature of reality, the nature of our mind. And how we develop these self-identities or these rigid views of separation is by arbitrarily saying this from that. But that's not the way that reality works. We can do it for practicality, but the true nature of things is that everything is in a total state of interconnectedness. And in that sense, there is no separate self. There is no character that's moving from the past to the future continuously. Moment to moment, impermanence. Moment to moment, interconnectedness. This is referring to, on a gross level, trees that rely on the soil and the sun, and the fact that our body literally is not separate from the sun. Literally, it's not separate. It's only arbitrarily that it is. Superficially, it's separated. But also that this refers to the nature of the mind, the nature of how the mind works, the nature of experience. Neurons and connections and emotions and psychology, and this reality functions under this principle. So when we practice introspection and looking in our meditation, we are looking into the nature of things. The expression insight into the true nature of things refers to seeing impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-selfhood. Seeing that nothing is worth getting, nothing is worth being, seeing that no object whatsoever should be grasped at, and clung to as being a self or as belonging to a self, as being good or bad, attractive or repulsive. Liking or disliking anything, even if it is only an idea or a memory, is clinging, trying to hang on to. It's not possible to hang on to. So that trying to hang on to, that clinging, is quite at the core of our suffering and our ignorance. To say that nothing is worth getting or being is the same as to say that nothing is worth clinging to. It's not worth clinging to because it's not possible to cling to it. It's not possible to hang on to it. It's not possible to hang on to this body or relationship ideas that we have. So to say that nothing is worth getting or being is the same as to say that nothing is worth clinging to. Getting refers to setting one's heart on property, position, wealth, or any pleasing object. Being refers to holding on to the awareness of one's self-image, identifying with one's status as a husband or a wife or a partner, a rich or poor person, a winner or loser or human being, or even the awareness of being oneself. If we look really deeply at it, even being oneself is no fun, is wearisome, because trying to be anything is a source of suffering. So don't try. Be. If one can completely give up clinging to the idea of being oneself, of any self-image, then one will no longer suffer. This is what it is to see the worthlessness of being anything, and is the gist of the statement that being anything, no matter what, is bound to be suffering in a way appropriate to that particular state of being. When there exists oneself, there are bound to exist things which are other than that self and belong to it. Thus, one has one's children, one's wife, one's this, one's that, and the other. Then one has one's duty as husband or wife, master or servant, and so on. There is no state of being such that to maintain it will not involve struggle. The trouble and struggle necessary to maintain one's state of being is the result of blind infatuation with things, of clinging. Now, this is not nihilism, this is not rejectionism. This is to wholeheartedly be where you are without any clinging to a state of becoming, or clinging to your idea of that experience, but to be. If we were to give up trying to get or to be anything, how could we exist? This is bound to be a major source of skepticism for anyone who has not given much thought to the matter. The words getting and being are based on mental defilements, on craving, on maintaining the idea of worth getting, worth being, activating the mind to get and be in real earnest. This is bound to lead to depression, anxiety, distress, and upset, or at least to a heavy burden on the mind. Knowing this truth, we must be constantly alert, keeping watch over the mind to see that it doesn't fall slave to getting and being through the influence of grasping and clinging. We should be smart enough to stay aloof from these unwholesome influences, these unwholesome misinterpretations or unskillful beliefs that we have in our mind about if I get this, I'll be happy. No, you won't. It doesn't work like that. Or if I get this, I will no longer suffer. It doesn't work like that. If, however, we are not yet in a position to withdraw completely from having and being, we must be mindful and wide awake, so that when we do get or become something, we do so without entanglement, without emotional upset. So if, however, we are not yet in a position to withdraw completely from having and being, we must be mindful and wide awake, so that when we do get or become something, we do so without entanglement, without emotional distress. So, we may not yet be in a position to withdraw completely from having and being. Let us together be mindful and wide awake, so that when we do get or become something, when we do experience something, we do so without entanglement, we do so without emotional upset or distress, we do so without giving up or falling back, but rather again and again being with this mindfulness and this wakefulness, this natural state of attentive awareness, this natural concentration. So together, let's take a moment to make sure that we're comfortable. Let's find a position in the body that is suitable for us. Hearing sounds, feeling the presence, feeling the quality of our mind at this moment, noticing, aware, bringing our mind and our focus onto the breath, onto this awareness of the body. Taking as our practice breathing and being aware. Noticing the feeling of having a body, noticing this experience, noticing the mind, but rather than getting tangled up in anything, rather than being defeated or giving up, if at any moment we become entangled, return back to the breath, return back to mindfulness, noticing the body, noticing the breathing. With emphasis on this natural concentration, this natural state of awareness that we find ourselves in. For the next few minutes, taking up this practice of being aware, breathing and having a body. Beginning and ending this practice with the sound of the bell. Sadhu, sadhu. All right. Good job, everyone, joining for this meditation practice, this guided reading. I hope this brought some benefit to your life, some peace, informative. And always remember that this meditative approach is something that we can bring to all aspects of our life. It doesn't only need to be when we're formally sitting meditation, but this natural concentration is available to us. It's simply a matter of tuning in, turning inward, and practicing this kind of introspection. Keeping in mind that a major part of the path is intentional ethical living. And from there, that concentration comes a little bit more easily, a little bit more directly when we live an ethical life. So, thank you everyone so much for joining. We will have part 2 of this series on Buddhadasa tomorrow at 8 p.m. Rome time. So I hope to see some of you there, maybe many of you there. And that's it. That'll be the end. Thank you for showing up to our location, Insight Activities, New Forest, and for participating in this class, reading, community event, community gathering. Okay. All right. Good night, everyone. See you around. Hopefully, see you tomorrow. That's when we'll have a part 2. And as we wrap up, I'll share this Tibetan bells. I really enjoy that. I think that's quite nice. So, some Tibetan bells to sign out.